Assassin's Creed 2 is an iconic game. For just in half the time of the first game, Assassin's Creed 2 remains to this day one of the most impressive sequels ever made. There's a lot of people who will argue that it's the best game in the entire series, and a few people who will even argue that it's one of the best games ever made, including Wikipedia. Because of that, it's hard to feel like I, as a lowly old game critic, have anything meaningful to add to the discussion around Assassin's Creed 2. What's possibly left to be said that hasn't been said already? It's one of those games that's been analysed to hell and back again. Praising Assassin's Creed 2 feels a bit like a film critic praising Citizen Kane. Oh, you like Assassin's Creed 2, do you? That's a very bold stance you're taking there. We've reached a point of total universal acclaim where praising the game has become cliché, and now it's the contrarian opinions that rise to the top. The people who hate the game or have serious problems with it are the only voices worth listening to anymore because everyone has heard all the praises 100 times already. And as much as I love being a contrarian, I just can't get there for Assassin's Creed 2. Even all these years later, I'm still kind of in awe of what an impressive project it is. Sure, it has some pretty major flaws, there's no such thing as a true masterpiece, and I wouldn't want it any other way. But there is a reason that Assassin's Creed 2 is so iconic, and there's a reason that the franchise has been chasing the success of this game more than it ever did the first game. Okay, it's disingenuous to say that this game hasn't always had its naysayers, and I don't think they're just being contrarian for attention. In fact, I think criticisms of Assassin's Creed 2 are really interesting because they exist at the axis of what some people think video games should be and what the Assassin's Creed games actually are. Since it came out, Assassin's Creed 2 has been a lightning rod in the age-old video game debate about difficulty, but rather than where this usually comes up in reference to ultra-hard games like Dark Souls, Assassin's Creed 2 goes in the opposite direction. It's really, really, really easy, to the point of providing almost no friction to the player whatsoever. It's pretty common for game critics to argue in favour of difficulty. Difficulty increases your mechanical enjoyment of the game, it gives the narrative more weight because your victories are more earned. And we're absolutely in the age where difficulty is equated with a game's fun factor. The age of the Souls-like. Too hard is a problem on the player's end, you should just get good. But too easy is a problem on the developer's end. If it's too easy, if there's no challenge to it, then why am I even playing it at all? Why don't I just watch a movie? At their meanest, people will say that Assassin's Creed 2 is no more than a glorified walking sim. But I can actually get meaner. I think Assassin's Creed 2 is easier than your typical walking sim. Firewatch doesn't challenge you mechanically, but it does challenge you narratively. It's about heavy themes and deep emotions. The true challenge of Firewatch happens inside of you instead of inside of the game. And Assassin's Creed 2 just doesn't have that kind of narrative difficulty. It's arguably the simplest story in the entire series, including the first game. The difference is I don't see that easiness as an inherent flaw. In fact, I think easiness is Assassin's Creed 2's greatest strength. I think it's the primary reason it's achieved such universal acclaim, and one of the reasons why it's become an iconic staple of the industry. So, yes, I am going to spend a lot of time praising Assassin's Creed 2, and you're just going to have to make your peace with that. After all, what's more contrarian than refusing to be a contrarian, right? No, as is my brand, I will attempt to be firm but fair. I can't pretend that I don't love this game, but it's not my favourite, and I am perfectly capable of seeing all of its flaws. I point them out of love. So let's talk about Assassin's Creed 2 and what makes a game an icon.
My name is Desmond Miles. I'm a prisoner of war. A war I never knew existed, waged by two groups I never thought were real. Templars and Assassins.
I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that Assassin's Creed 2 is about double the size of the first game. It adds so much stuff that the first game feels like a tech demo in comparison, but it introduces all of that size slowly. It picks up directly where the first game left off, and I do mean directly. Desmond is still staring at the wall right where we left him. But the game does also give a brief recap of the events of the first game, which I think is telling, because in a lot of ways Assassin's Creed 2 feels like it's designed to be someone's first entry into the series. While the story is picking up exactly where we left off, everything feels like a reset. Literally going back to zero to start from the ground up again, which is even explicitly how the narrative is framed. Lucy comes in to break Desmond out, but before they go, she plugs Desmond into the Animus one last time to link to a new ancestor. And let me tell you, you don't get more starting from the beginning than this.
Listen to him. A fine set of lungs.
And what shall we call him, my love?
Ezio. Ezio Auditori da Firenze.
I'm not sure you get more beginning than introducing the basic controls as a literal seconds-old newborn baby. In contrast to the first game, Assassin's Creed 2 starts with a bang. After being reborn, it's time for a daring escape sequence in the modern day, running through the halls of Abstergo and getting into brawls with security. And we're only about 2 minutes into the game, but we can already start having that discussion about difficulty because it's actually completely impossible to fail at this escape attempt. Lucy tells you to follow her through this maze of office cubicles to avoid the guards, but you can completely ignore her and get into a fight with the guards with no consequences. Desmond can take more punches than a shonen protagonist. You don't even need to fight back because eventually Lucy will come along and just do it for you. There is a reason for this. Just like the first game, Assassin's Creed 2 contextualizes all of the video game elements as part of the Animus. You don't die, you desynchronize and reload the memory. You can't do that in the real-world portions of the game without breaking the immersiveness of that design choice, so the game just makes it so that it's impossible to actually die in the real-life sections. And, you know, that's probably fine, right? After all, this is me deliberately breaking the game on purpose and ignoring what it told me to do. Surely, this isn't a sign of things to come for the rest of the game. After the escape, the modern day becomes pretty much a flip of the sequences in the first game. Instead of being trapped in a lab by Templars, you're trapped in a warehouse by the assassins. Not literally trapped, they'd probably let Desmond leave, but you, the player, can't leave. You're confined to this semi-futuristic 2012 warehouse with Lucy and two of her assassin friends, who are about to become the most consistent characters in the entire franchise. Rebecca, the tech whiz Animus engineer, and Sean, the book-smarts guy who isn't voiced by Stephen Merchant. It's a different British comedian who happens to look and sound exactly like Stephen Merchant.
Who are you?
I'm sorry, where are my manners? I'm Sean Hastings. This is Rebecca Crane.
Nice to meet you, Desmond.
Right, well, it's been lovely chatting, but if you don't mind, Desmond, it's best we get straight to work. Time is precious. Doubly so these days.
Desmond in the modern day plays a much smaller role in the second game than it did in the first, likely because the modern day elements were so universally despised. But the idea this time around is to make the modern day feel much more comfy. Instead of the cold clinical surgery table of the first Animus, the Animus 2.0 is a plush comfy chair. The warehouse is coloured in warm browns, and while Sean is a bit of a jackass at first, when you warm up to him it becomes clear that really he's just a big nerd. But with Desmond out of Abstergo, why exactly does he need to go back into the Animus at all? In the first game, they were looking for something in his memories, but this time the framing is much simpler. It's a tutorial.
I still don't see how I fit into things.
We're going to train you. Turn you into one of us.
What? No, you've seen me in action. I'm no good at this, and even if I was, it would take months. Years even.
No, not with the Animus. Not with the bleeding effect.
The idea is basically the same as the kung fu scene in The Matrix. Whatever Desmond learns in the Animus, he'll also learn in real life. So you'll follow a new assassin as he learns all of the skills to become a master. Ezio Auditore da Firenze. Why Ezio in particular? Why not Altair again? That's a question that won't be answered until the end of the game. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Besides, the real reason we're going to Ezio has much more to do with the marketing department than it does with Desmond's character journey.
My name is Desmond Miles, and this is my story.
Oh, sure it is, buddy. Assassin's Creed 2 is set in the late 15th century during the Italian Renaissance, about 300 years after the events of the first game. When you consider the factors involved, it's kind of a perfect setting for the series. Assassin's Creed was a game where you got to climb on all the buildings, and the Renaissance is a period famous for its architectural advances. If I had to guess at the primary reason why Florence and Venice were chosen, that's the reason. Both cities contain some of the most iconic buildings in the world, and both cities hit their stride during the Renaissance era. It was a time period of great transition, at least that's how it's remembered by history. The end of the Middle Ages and the beginning of modern enlightened thinking. A time when great technological advances were being made, but also a time when dying in a sword fight was still a pretty common occurrence. It also sets Assassin's Creed 2 apart from all other video games, and really, most other media in general. Assassin's Creed was innovative for its immersion and how it displayed its historical setting, but not really for the setting itself. The Crusades are well trodden in the wider media landscape, and the medieval era is pretty much the standard look of the entire fantasy genre. There's a long-running series of games called Crusader Kings, for instance. The Renaissance doesn't have such a cultural presence. It gets referenced a lot, particularly the paintings, statues, and artists, but the time period itself is rarely explored in stories. The largest piece of media set during the Renaissance probably is Assassin's Creed 2, and that means that Ubisoft got to define what this time period looks like in our pop culture understanding of it. And let's get this out of the way immediately. Assassin's Creed 2 is a gorgeous game. You're seeing the 2016 remaster right now, the original graphics are definitely showing their age these days, but the beauty of Assassin's Creed 2 isn't in its graphical quality as much as in its architectural faithfulness. It's a beautiful game because Florence and Venice are both beautiful cities in real life. Not that I've ever been myself, I'm not quite at the point of success yet where I can take a trip to Italy for the sake of my videos. Not yet anyway, obviously that's the goal. Unlike the cities in the medieval era, the cities of Assassin's Creed 2 have, for the most part, kept their historical layouts intact, and while Assassin's Creed presents a very condensed version of Florence and Venice, they feel bright and so much more natural than the very artificial cities in the first game. Of course, all of the buildings have been studied with random wooden beams and hanging gardens for your climbing convenience, and there's some historical inaccuracies, buildings that are complete that wouldn't have been when the game is set, but overall, the feeling of Assassin's Creed 2 is perfect. In an open world game, the world itself is one of the most important characters, and wherever the story takes you, the background is always the most impressive part. Assassin's Creed 2 and all of the games going forward from this point don't just view their historical settings as a backdrop for the story, but as a chance to partake in what I can best describe as historical tourism. A chance to see places and eras lost to history with the wonder of digital recreation. That's kind of the point of the infamous viewpoints. Sure, you climb up them so you can fill in the mini-map, but it's really just an excuse to give you a great panoramic view of a world that doesn't exist anymore. More than assassins or sword fights or Desmond in his comfy chair, this is what Assassin's Creed is all about, exploring and experiencing these historic locations as they existed when that history was being made. Of course, you need someone to explore and experience that history with, and thus we get Ezio Auditore, the most famous and most beloved protagonist in the entire franchise.
Buonasera, Viena. We were just talking about you. I'm surprised to see you here. I thought the Pazzi hired others to do their dirty work.
It's your family that cries for guards when there's trouble, Cotardo. Afraid to handle things yourself?
Your sister seemed quite satisfied with the handling I gave her earlier.
Here's where you get my hottest takes. I do not think that Ezio is one of the best protagonists in all of video games. I like Ezio. I like him a lot. You're supposed to like him, but that inherent likability is what makes him a much less depthful character than Altair was. Altair's story was one of de-radicalization, indoctrination, and learning to define your own morality and your own boundaries. To learn that nothing is true and everything is permitted. It was a complicated and philosophical journey. Ezio's story is one of the oldest stories in human literature. Revenge. Altair was a weird monk-like murderer with no passion and no sympathy until he learns it late into his story. Ezio is a charming, friendly, noble party boy who makes friends with everyone and looks out for his family no matter what. He's much easier to like and root for than Altair, and that's because he's fundamentally a much simpler character. And let me be clear here, I'm not using simple as an insult. Far from it, Ezio's inherent simpleness is what makes him a good protagonist. He's easy to like, easy to connect to, and easy to root for in a way that Altair wasn't for most players. There's a good reason why it's Ezio at the front of all those character lineups and not Altair. People didn't really care for Assassin's Creed's long, slow, and slightly boring philosophical lectures, so the entire game was dumbed down to appeal more broadly to general audiences. And it worked. There was a few hardcores pissed about this change, people who wanted more of that philosophical approach the first game took, but long lectures about the nature of reality are not a strong foundation for a franchise. Fun is. And Ezio's all about fun. There's no clearer way to see the disparity between the two games than by how they both introduced their respective protagonists. Altair's first act was murdering an innocent man for no good reason. Ezio's introduction sees him getting into street fights, joking around with his brother, and sleeping with the ladies. Sure, he's a rich kid coasting through life, but he's not a bad kid. He helps out his mum on errands, avenges his sister's honour, helps his younger brother collect feathers for a secret project. Ezio is nice. His life is far too good, which is how you know it's all about to go up in flames. But that isn't a consequence of his own actions like it was for Altair. Ezio doesn't really have any flaws at all. He gets angry, but never to a dangerous degree. His womanizing never becomes a real issue for him. He knows when it's okay to talk and when he should keep his mouth shut. He's not selfish or impatient or anything bad at all, really. He goes on a quest for revenge, sure, but that revenge never consumes him or stops him from helping others. Let me put it to you this way, if Ezio was a woman, she'd absolutely be accused of being a Mary Sue. And again, I don't think that's bad. Most game protagonists in this era are. Altair was a bit of an anomaly and deceive ultra-competent sexy bad boys with a heart of gold. Us gamers clearly have a type. I don't think this is the best or most interesting thing that can be done with a game protagonist, which is why Assassin's Creed 2 probably doesn't hit my top 5 games in the series, but I don't dislike it. Ezio is the very essence of Ubisoft's approach to making video games. He's likeable without challenging you. He's comfortable, and there's nothing wrong with comfortable. Assassin's Creed 2 has a much larger scope than the first game. Where that story took place over a few months, Assassin's Creed 2's story covers just over 20 years. From Ezio's youth in Florence to the end of his long quest for vengeance with him as a wizened and well-travelled man. But a quest for revenge has to start somewhere, and so it starts with Ezio's family, at least the men of the family, being wrongfully executed after being framed for murder, including the small child. Ezio's dad was an assassin. In fact, he's the star of a very strange little artifact of history called Assassin's Creed Lineage, a short film released in the lead up to the game that blends live action and CGI in a very strange and slightly uncanny way. Naturally, the conspiracy against him was devised by the Templars. Assassin's Creed 2, this time it's personal. People often talk about this scene with reverence, but I think I've just seen it too much at this point for it to have any of the shock value anymore. It's a relatively standard beat for this kind of story, minus maybe the brothers getting the axe as well. It's pretty much just...
My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
Avenging your father's murder is one of the oldest stories in human literature, back to the days of ancient Greece and beyond. And Assassin's Creed 2 is not subverting or changing the classic format in any way, it just blends it into its framing of a war between two secret societies. Compared to the Templars of the first game, the Templars of Assassin's Creed 2 are pretty much just cackling supervillains. When you kill them, they make no effort to defend their actions like they did in the first game. Instead, they mostly just insult you or beg for mercy. It is a revenge story, but not in the more subversive, when you start a quest for revenge, dig 2 graves sort of way. Ezio's dad was a good man, and the men who conspired to kill him are evil men who should probably die. It's a good versus evil story through and through. And that doesn't make it bad. Assassin's Creed 2 tells a simple story in a very competent way more competently than the first game told its more complicated story. I've hit on this point a couple times already, but the story of Assassin's Creed 2 is comfortable. It follows an age-old formula, it's clear who's a hero and who's a villain, and it plays out exactly how you expect it to. That's fine. It's good, even. That's a higher standard of storytelling than the generation of games that came before. And I think a lot of that credit has to go to Roger Craig Smith, the voice of Ezio, who delivers an absolutely masterful performance throughout the game. He's able to portray a change in Ezio throughout the years by adjusting his voice ever so slightly as the years go by, starting with that youthful swagger, but by the end he sounds like a man who's done a lot of hard living. And the change is so gradual that you don't really even register it as it's happening, but by the end he sounds like a completely different person.
Hey, my father's blade and bracer. How did you get them?
By using the same skills I've just taught you.
It's not exactly in working condition.
So, how did I do?
I've seen better.
You wound me with your cruel, cruel words.
You picked a fine time for a homecoming.
Then it's true. Savonarola has taken control of Firenze.
Yes. No doubt aided by that treacherous artifact.
We should get to work on retrieving it.
There are several games in the series that take place over a long period of time, like Assassin's Creed 2, but none of them feel as genuine as Ezio's transformation across the years. And while his face does age too, it's mainly down to Roger Craig Smith's voice work. It's hampered a little bit by the fact that nobody else in the game ages apart from Ezio, but since they're temporary and Ezio is pretty much always on screen, the effect still comes through. If you're desperate for the more philosophical stuff from the first game, then it is hidden in there. Scattered around the world are codex pages written by Altair after the events of his game. And true to his character, most of it is waxing philosophical about things like the 3 ironies of the assassins and the inherent value of love. Ultimately, Ezio's story is just the framework for the true draw of the game. Not the gameplay, certainly not that, but the historical tourism. Because it's not just a matter of seeing these places as they used to be, but experiencing the making of history and meeting some of its main characters in the flesh. It's not just that Assassin's Creed 2 is about twice as long as the first game. Every hour of that length is so much more dense with variation and activity than the first game could dream of. Every chapter introduces new characters, new conflicts, a new setting and new set pieces. And on top of the story, the world has been filled with much more meaningful side activities. There's now a basic economic system that lets you upgrade your equipment or invest into upgrading your home base of Monteriggioni. There's secret tombs to delve into and plunder, collectibles that actually have an impact on the story, various side jobs to do and bring in some extra money, or just to give your wandering around the cities a little more structure. We've thankfully ditched the non-cutscene cutscenes of the first game in favour of a more traditionally cinematic approach, which works much better for the game. But really, the biggest change is just in mission variety. The worst part of the first game was its endless, mind-numbing repetition, and that's a problem the second game is well aware of and seeks to avoid. Each chapter is part of an ongoing story, rather than the identical assassination missions that made up the structure of the first game. And generally speaking, each chapter beyond the first few are centred on a significant historical event of the era. The Pazzi conspiracy, Venice's Carnivale, and the assassination of 2 doges, the Florentine bonfire of the Vanities, etc. I guess this is the reasoning behind the 20-year time period. It lets them put Ezio in a wider variety of these historical events than a few months would allow, but it also gives each chapter a distinct feeling and tone. It's a clever structure for the story. The game takes a lot of liberties with these events, of course, but it weaves in its secret societies pretty naturally. The Pazzi family wasn't just hungry for power in Florence, they were Templars. The bonfire of the Vanities wasn't just a rise in religious extremism, it was fueled by a piece of Eden. The most famous example in the game is probably Ezio's lifelong friendship with Leonardo da Vinci, but that's not his only historical celebrity BFF, as he also gets chummy with Lorenzo de' Medici, Niccolò Machiavelli, and Caterina Sforza. Most of the Templars you kill were real people too, especially the Grand Master, Rodrigo Borgia. You don't need to know who any of these people are to enjoy the game, although I'm guessing most people probably know Leonardo da Vinci at least. For me, playing the games as a kid, Assassin's Creed was my gateway into history, and I certainly wasn't the only one. Throughout this series, I'm probably going to cite OSP Blue's history videos a lot, and he also cites Assassin's Creed 2 as the beginning of his passion for history. The game's enthusiasm for history is infectious, where even if you don't know what they're referencing, you know they're referencing something and you're intrigued to learn more. The game does even include a place to learn more if you're so inclined, and it's both one of the best and most frustrating things in the game, the Animus database. The database is fun because it tells you some of the real history of these figures you meet across the game, and the entire thing is written from the perspective of Sean, so it's full of snarky comments and asides. The only issue with that being that it's the history of Assassin's Creed, not real life, so the real life information is seamlessly mixed in with the made up stuff of the game world. For example, one of the most confusing and annoying entries is Ezio's mother, which claims she kept a diary and it's held in a gallery in Florence, which is made up, because Maria Auditore is a purely fictional character and there is no such diary. But the way it's written doesn't make that clear at all. The character is fictional, and so Sean's source of information on her is also fictional. But this is so unclear that it sparked a decades-long misconception that Ezio and his family are based on the writings of Maria Auditore's journals, which they aren't because the journal isn't real. That's a very difficult problem to solve, because adding some sort of indicator to the database of what's real history and what's made up for the game world would destroy the immersion of the system entirely. The game can't put a little note on each person that says this person is fake and this person is real, because within the fiction of the game world, all of these people are supposed to be equally real. It's pretty much up to the player to decipher who's a real person and who's made up for the game, because it's in the game's interest not to make that clear at all. And that's why the database is so frustrating, because it does contain a lot of genuine history, but you've got to fact check most of it before you start spreading it around, because even though it's presented as fact, a good portion of it is just completely made up. And that made up history goes way beyond the Renaissance. While the modern day stuff takes a major backseat in this game, there is one exception within the Animus itself. Throughout the open world are various anachronistic glyphs, and scanning them reveals them to be messages left by Desmond's predecessor, the guy who left all those messages scrawled in blood over the walls. Subject 16. These messages are presented as the ramblings of a madman, as extended use of the Animus drove Subject 16 completely insane. And these messages and puzzles to decipher have a real Charlie Corkboard vibe to them. But at the same time, these ramblings are presented as true history, at least within the game world, showing across all history the conflict between the Assassins and the Templars and the influences of the Pieces of Eden. It's a well of lore that the franchise is still drawing from to this day, things like George Washington and Napoleon having Apples of Eden, the introduction of further types of artifacts like the Sword and the Shroud of Eden, which both come up in much later games. And along with that, a lot of conspiracy staples, like the Kennedy assassination being orchestrated by the Templars, Nikola Tesla's technological advances are credited to a piece of Eden, the moon landing was really to pick up a piece of Eden, and Churchill, Stalin, Roosevelt and Hitler were all under Templar control and they orchestrated World War II under the instructions of Henry Ford. Of course! I think this conspiracy stuff has aged very weirdly thanks to the terrible world we live in. In 2009, it was assumed that everyone understood that all of this was clearly just fictional fun. Nobody really believes in this kind of red string conspiracy stuff, so we can just go wild with it. Every important event in history was secretly orchestrated by either the Assassins or the Templars using magic orbs. Unfortunately, in 2024, that's not true anymore, and exactly this kind of conspiracy talk wins and loses elections. We're living in the age of QAnon, where a shockingly large portion of the American population believe in a cabal that secretly rules the world and worships Satan. So, suddenly this kind of conspiracy stuff feels a lot less fun and a lot more dangerous. Replaying all of this grand conspiracy stuff this time around made me uncomfortable in a way that I did not appreciate, and that's not Ubisoft's fault. In 2009, this kind of talk was only the domain of fringe weirdos who nobody took seriously, so using it as the basis for your game world was mostly harmless. Now it's the domain of powerful politicians who inspire attacks on Congress and more murders than I can count. Suddenly presenting a world where all the crazy shit these people say is completely true feels a lot more uncomfortable. Of course, that's only one layer of the conspiracy afoot in Assassin's Creed. There's a deeper layer where the series just goes completely off the rails. As you solve 16's riddles, you unlock pieces of a video file that appears to be some sort of NVIDIA graphics card tech demo. But in reality, once you complete the entire thing, it shows two people, a man and a woman, escaping from a futuristic sci-fi facility with an apple. Adam and Eve with the forbidden fruit of paradise. This is the foundational deep lore of the Assassin's Creed universe. Evolution is fake. Humanity were created as a slave race by the ones who came before, an advanced civilization who existed millions of years ago and now whose relics are all that remain. Thank God they removed that crossbow though, I mean, can you imagine? I've never been sure how to feel about this side of the series. On the one hand, it's critically important because it's the driving force of almost every single game. Even this one eventually pivots to being about stopping Rodrigo Borgia from gaining access to an Apple of Eden and its power. And yet, on the other hand, it's so unimportant to what the appeal of the games actually is. Historical tourism. The ancient beings and magical artifacts are the most obvious and atonal elements of every game, even shrouded in Desley's insistence that it's sci-fi, not fantasy. The Pieces of Eden are essentially magical artifacts, and that's how everyone uses them and perceives them in the story. I don't think it's completely invalid as a world-building detail for your story. It's kind of interesting. Magical realism is a genre for a reason. It's just not what I enjoy about the games. When people talk about Assassin's Creed 2 having a great story, they're usually talking about bonding with Leonardo da Vinci or running through Venice at night during the carnival. They're probably not thinking about the part where you have a wizard fight with the Pope. Because as fun as that sounds, it's completely dissonant with the rest of the game, and also, somehow, one of the most boring boss fights in video game history. All of the problems with Assassin's Creed 2's gameplay can be condensed into a single clip. During Sequence 7, you're supposed to infiltrate a palazzo and assassinate a Templar hiding in there. You're supposed to climb up the wall, at least that's what the game suggests you do, but I messed up the jump and ended up launching myself back into the courtyard and in front of the guards. The fall took off almost all of my health, but I chugged a medicine bottle to get back up to full, but then the guards discovered me, so I decided to let them kill me to reset the checkpoint. Here's what happened next.
Now, wait for it! Don't fall for false openings!
Assassin's Creed 2 takes a lot of steps to try and improve the lackluster gameplay of the first game, particularly it implements a lot of new systems that are supposed to encourage stealth. There's now an active notoriety system that will raise whenever you cause a ruckus, which can make traversing a city a real pain. And there's no regenerating health anymore, you need to use a consumable item in order to regain your health. There's some variety to the enemies now, including these big brutes who cannot be counter-killed like everyone else. Crowd blending has been changed from just groups of monks to every crowd you can see, which theoretically makes it much more useful. And the game adds several hireable groups around the map to assist you, like courtesans to distract the guards, or thieves to also distract the guards, or mercenaries to fight the guards. Your arsenal is massively expanded from the first game, including a second hidden blade for double assassinations, along with various ledge takedowns and the like, poison, and of course the extremely historically accurate hidden gun.
Stay back, or I will kill them. I swear it.
All of these changes are theoretically positive, but in practice, Assassin's Creed 2's stealth is even worse than it was in the first game, and it has even less consequences for failure, because the combat is so easy that you actually have to just put the controller down and wait to lose a fight. The notoriety is comically easy to get rid of, medicine is extremely cheap, and the guards are some of the most observant guards I've ever seen in a stealth game, so you are going to get caught, but that's fine because outside of about 2 missions I can think of, stealth is never required of you anyway. Lead game designer Patrick Pleur gave a GDC talk about the making of Assassin's Creed 2, and in it he talks a lot about the 3 core pillars of gameplay and how important it is to challenge players on those 3 core pillars. The 3 pillars he mentions are combat, stealth, and traversal. He admits in that talk that the combat is a failure because it's way too easy, but I would counter that the stealth is also a failure because it's next to impossible most of the time. Just like the first game, half of your targets are scripted to notice you. You literally can't sneak up on them even if you try, so eventually you just stop trying. The only pillar that really gets its fair shake is the traversal. Most of the tombs to explore are elaborate platforming mazes that successfully test your navigational skills and mastery of the climbing systems. They are genuinely good and well praised. The combat, however, is never a challenge. Here is the final boss in the game. Just keep whacking the Pope into submission for 5 minutes. It's truly an intense battle we're having. It's somehow easier than the first game because at least those guards in the first game packed a punch when they managed to hit you. All of the combat in the game is just like that opening escape with Desmond. If you're doing what the game wants you to do, by which I mean fighting back, countering attacks, using all your tricks, then the combat feels fine. If you ignore the game, then the entire thing breaks and you realise that there was never any tension to begin with. And you know what? That's actually fine. So says I, the arbiter of good and bad game design. Could the game be improved with a more difficult combat system? Maybe. But does it need one? Not at all, because Assassin's Creed 2 doesn't define fun by mechanical engagement like other games do. Combat adds to the flavour of the world and to the story, but it's not the heart of the game. It's part of the reason the series is so popular. Being easy means the games are very accessible to more casual players who don't have the time or reflexes to get good at action games. And as much as it might hurt the feelings of some hardcore Assassin's Creed fans to say, stealth games are niche. And part of the reason the franchise has maintained its popularity is that the stealth is either easy or completely optional, letting players who normally don't enjoy stealth still engage with the game. The buzzword of the video so far has been comfortable, and that's all building up to right now, my grand thesis. Assassin's Creed 2 isn't an action-adventure game at all. Assassin's Creed 2 is a cozy game. Cozy games have been around for a long time, but the term only gained traction in the last few years. The idea of cozy games is that they're low stress, inviting, comfortable, and relaxing. The de facto examples are Animal Crossing or Stardew Valley, but the term is pretty broadly applicable across genres. For example, in between all the twee indie games about flowers, Wired's list of cozy games includes Baldur's Gate 3, and for the exact same reasons they give, I think Assassin's Creed 2 more than qualifies. Ezio is a friendly and inviting guy who makes lots of friends across a big world to explore at your own pace. There's a metagame where you build up a small town, refurbishing the shops and clearing away the vines to make it all shiny and new again, and buying paintings to hang up in your private art room. There's combat, sure, but it's not exactly high stress, high tension combat. It's easy. It's relaxing. Because the story takes place over such a long period of time, there's really no sense of urgency to it. You can take your time, do a few missions, then just go for a walk, scale some viewpoints, delve into a dungeon. I mean, honestly, have you heard the music that plays as you explore Florence? I mean, really, if I played this over footage of Animal Crossing, would you even question it? Assassin's Creed 2's genius is the way that it creates a world that you just enjoy being in. Nobody cares that the gameplay is shallow in Animal Crossing because that's not what the game is really about. And the same logic applies to Assassin's Creed 2, and a lot of the series for that matter. Even the Animus interface is completely redesigned from the last game's interface. The harsh blues and blacks have been replaced with ethereal whites and soft shapes, friendly shapes. A feature people often complain about in the series is the eavesdropping missions, where you follow someone around town as they have a chat. It's one of several mission varieties in the game that doesn't have any action in it whatsoever. Others can include racing your fellows across the rooftops, delivering letters. Your first mission in Venice is just to go on a nice tour with Leonardo. Oh sure, the game starts with a child being hanged, but the game never swerves nearly that dark again and pivots way more towards romances and bromances for the rest of the game. I think this is why a lot of hardcore gamer types bounce off of Assassin's Creed and how the games have ended up with this paradoxical reputation of being shite despite everyone loving them. People see a guy covered in weapons on the cover and want a mechanics-focused experience, either stealth or combat. When they get stuck in one of the non-action missions, they're impatient and just want to get to the action, and when they get to the action, it's mechanically dry and easy. If you're the type of player who skips all the cutscenes and cares more about gameplay than anything else, then playing through all of the Assassin's Creed games would be some kind of purgatory, because the action is only a small part of the overall experience. Conversely, if you're someone who doesn't really care about combat or gameplay, if you're just here for historical tourism, then the lack of challenge is freeing. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to become a master assassin yourself to experience the story, and you can just enjoy living in this world for a while. I don't know if Ubisoft Montreal knew this was the kind of game they were making. I can't see how much of this is intentional and how much is just an accident because they completely fucked up making a good combat system. On the one hand, creative director Patrice Désilets is always talking about how he wants games to be more than just killing people. But on the other hand, I don't think the lead game designer would be apologising for the shoddy combat system in GDC talks if he didn't think it was a genuine problem. I think by the next game they had a clear idea of what they were making, since Brotherhood turns all of Rome into Ezio's personal renovation project. But here, with the contradictory ideas outside and inside the game, I just don't know for sure. I don't think it's something I even really understood about the game until replaying it for this video. I enjoy lingering in Assassin's Creed 2 so much more than I do in other games. I enjoy doing the side activities even though there's not a specific reason to. I'm a completionist, I like to get all of the achievements, but I already have them all for Assassin's Creed 2, and yet I found myself doing all the extra stuff anyway just because I wanted to, because I like running around these big grandiose cities. Of course, comfortable and history don't always mix in the best of ways because generally speaking, no matter where you're looking, things were generally not so comfortable for everyone. It's undeniable that as part of this comfortable and inviting world, Assassin's Creed 2 paints an extremely sanitised version of the 15th century. For example, slavery? What's that? I hope I'm not going to shock you with the revelation that Europeans in the 1400s participated in the slave trade. Our good pal Lorenzo de' Medici absolutely owned slaves. Slavery has been an ever-present part of human history until recently, or still to this day depending on your perspective. And it's something that the first game at least paid lip service to. Two of your targets in the first game are explicitly involved in the slave trade. Even in the codex of this game, Altair talks about his personal hatred of the practice. But when it comes to the actual Renaissance game world, it's something they'd rather you just don't think about. The Renaissance may have been the birthplace of modern enlightened thinking, but it's been argued by many historians that the modernists were a pack of rich hypocrites about a lot of stuff. As is the case a lot of the time throughout history, it was an enlightened time for men. Rich men who look like me and my friends. We're the enlightened ones. women didn't really have a renaissance in the way that men did. They were still under the thumb of medieval views on women as primarily housewives and sex objects, not suited to complicated tasks like voting or controlling their own lives and finances. There were some defined counterexamples like Caterina Sforza, but she was an exception and society fought bitterly against her at every turn. Not in Assassin's Creed 2 though. The game has several supporting women characters, particularly the two heads of the courtesan factions in each city and Caterina herself. And the game doesn't really acknowledge at all that these women had it a lot worse than their male contemporaries. Ezio's just like, I like her, she's feisty. Not, wow, she's transgressing the boundaries of her entire society so much that the Catholic Church wants her dead. The closest the game gets to acknowledging a major flaw with Renaissance Italian society is class. In one of Ezio's conversations with Antonio, the leader of the Venetian Thieves Guild, he talks about how when he was young, he was raised to believe that nobles were better and superior to him in every way, but now he's realised that they're just a pack of rich assholes who don't care about the lower class populations of Venice as anything more than pawns in their constant squabbles for power. Even then, the game still splits itself into the good nobles and the bad nobles. Lorenzo and the Medici are the good nobles, while the Pazzi family are the bad nobles. Why? I don't think it has anything to do with history at all. I don't think Ubisoft are making a serious moral qualification on these two noble houses. I think they just chose sides based on narrative convenience. The Pazzi conspiracy was a failure, therefore if you want the player to be on the winning side, then they need to be on the side of the Medici. If the Pazzi conspiracy had gone off as intended, then I guarantee the game would have painted Lorenzo as a tyrannical ruler and a Templar. History is written by the victors, so they say. There's also the question of anti-Semitism. You ever read The Merchant of Venice? Pretty yigsy stuff from old William, but he was reflecting the attitudes of the time, and that was written 100 years after this game is set. But to my knowledge, the game doesn't include a single Jewish character, or any mention of religious groups aside from Catholicism at all. The game focuses a lot on Savonarola's vanity-hating stance during his leadership of Florence, the burning of jewellery and fancy clothes, and not so much on the Catholic supremacy angle, which it would prefer not to talk about. Or how about your BFF, Leonardo da Vinci? In 1476, the same year the game starts, da Vinci was accused of sodomy, and historians have speculated for a long time that da Vinci was probably gay. This is something that the in-game database even mentions, but the story never goes there. Even though in the age of papal power, if that accusation had gone to court, he would have been burned at the stake. Assassin's Creed 2 just has no interest in exploring any of these ugly truths of history, and in quietly ignoring all of this stuff, they create a comfier game world, but also a less authentic one. Contrary to what you might think, the two ideas are not mutually exclusive. In fact, my favourite games in the series are the ones that are able to thread the needle between the harsh realities of history and the cosy, welcoming world of an Assassin's Creed game. After all, history has its kindness and its cruelty, and you can and should acknowledge both. Because it's not that the game needs to include these things, it's just that not including them and taking a meaningful stance on them is a missed opportunity. A sanitised version of history is also just a less interesting version of history. The assassin philosophy of radical freedom is always in opposition to the kind of oppression seen throughout history. It's the subject of one of Altair's codex pages. Man seeks domination over all that he encounters. I suppose it is a natural tendency for us to aspire towards mastery of our surroundings, but this should not include other human beings. Every day, more and more are pressed into service by deception or by force. Others, though not so firmly imprisoned, are made to feel as if their lives are worthless. I have seen the ways in which men persecute women, heard the cruel words hurled at those who came here from other lands, watched as those who believe or act differently are made to suffer. We discuss such things often, watching as we do from the spires of Masyaf. What can be done to stop this, to encourage tolerance and equality? Some days we speak of education, believing that knowledge will free us from immorality. But as I walk the streets and see slaves sent off to auction, my heart grows cold. When I see the husband hurl abuses and stones at his wife, insisting she exists only to serve him, my fists clench. And when I see children torn from their parents so that another man might profit, sent off to suffer beneath the desert sun and die. On those days, I do not think that dialogue will make a difference. On those days, I can only think of how the perpetrators need to die. Why is it that in the text pages a fraction of players will ever actually read the game can explore the drama inherent in history's cruelties, but in-game it would prefer that you don't think about these things at all? The Templars are evil because they scheme to take power, and what are they going to do once they get that power? Don't worry about it. Bad stuff, probably. We don't need to go into detail. In an obscure letter hidden in an optional collectible, we can have Henry IV talk about how Europe could do with a good purge, but reflecting that kind of despicable attitude in the actual game is off limits. Assassin's Creed 2's story is fine, good even, but because it refuses to engage with any of the uncomfortable realities of Renaissance Italy, the setting becomes purely aesthetic. It has nothing to say as historical fiction about its setting. It only talks from the perspective of a historical tourist. Look how pretty everything is. Please don't ask us who built it. It's generally impossible to talk about history without talking about politics, but Assassin's Creed 2 sure tries its best to do that anyway, and I think for the most part it succeeds. It only aspires to be a fun video game, and any questions beyond that it would prefer to avoid. That doesn't make it bad. It is a fun video game, but it could be more than that, and it deliberately chooses not to be. Of course, Ubisoft refusing to engage with the politics of their game settings is nothing new. It's practically a point of pride at this point. And Assassin's Creed 2 is actually the entry point for another of Ubisoft's PR crimes, monetization. Assassin's Creed 2 was the first game to introduce us to the wonderful world of Uplay, including several bonus missions that were only accessible via a Uplay account and Uplay rewards, a feature which has become a Ubisoft trademark at this point. And the game was also hit with some backlash for its DLC expansions. Normally, I prefer to organise these videos into release order, which means covering the base game and then finishing on any DLC. But that doesn't really work so well for Assassin's Creed 2 because the DLC is so innately tied into the actual story. The game has 14 sequences, which is its name for chapters. On launch, sequences 12 and 13 were skipped with some line about technical difficulties and they were added later as DLC. With the remaster as part of the Ezio collection, these sequences are slotted into the main story again, and they feel very strange that way. According to Desley, these sequences were cut from the base game to free up development time so they could meet their release date, which does make sense, and the game wasn't exactly lacking without them. But of course, when you tell someone that something was supposed to be in the base game and now they have to pay extra for it, they're going to get mad about that idea regardless. In actually playing through them though, it's pretty clear why they were cut. They both cover interesting historical events, but they're also largely tangential to the story that was being built up to by that point. At the end of Sequence 11, all of the friendly NPCs reveal themselves to be assassins, along with Machiavelli, who shows up and is like, "Hello, I'm Machiavelli, I'm technically younger than Ezio, but we're just going to ignore that." And they officially induct Ezio into the Brotherhood. They've also managed to grab the apple from Rodrigo Borgia, and he's the last Templar standing. Skipping to the final confrontation in Rome feels pretty natural. Instead, with the DLC sequences, you spend the next 8 years kind of faffing about in other places before getting to that conclusion. It is likely that initially these sequences were more incorporated into the main plot, but after being cut they were rewritten to be more tangential. Turns out Ezio lost the apple for a few years. Savonarola, who has nothing to do with the Assassins or the Templars, took it and used it to rule Florence for a few years, then Ezio got it back. He also grew a beard. Of the two, Sequence 12 feels like it was the more finished before being cut. The entire city and surrounding wetland of Forli are in the base game, but you only spend one mission there on your way to Venice. Sequence 12 adds the actual story content to Forli, and all the stuff involving Caterina Sforza. Sequence 13 then covers Savonarola's takeover of Florence and the Bonfire of the Vanities. It feels much more distinctly DLC-ish. It adds a new district to Florence, including a weird and almost never used bouncy pole feature. And it is so unnecessarily long and padded, it almost feels like a reference to the first game. You're given 9 targets around Florence to kill, none of whom are named, but all of whom get a load screen death and a Requiescat in Pace from Ezio. As DLC, this makes sense. Incorporated into the main story like it is in the remaster, it's exhausting. And yet, at the same time, I'm still kind of glad it exists. DLC is not inherently evil, I think it has its place, and I actually think Assassin's Creed 2's DLC is an interesting use of DLC expansions, expanding on the parts of the story that you don't strictly need, but that are still interesting to see. I probably would have kept them optional though. Sequence 13 actually ends with Ezio giving a big speech about his life and the lessons he's learned, and ends with him walking off into the sunset with the other assassins. It's clearly intended to be the last thing a player sees in Assassin's Creed 2, which makes sense because Ezio's actual ending in this game is not that. Unfortunately, I already spoiled the final boss of the game, but yes, you do travel to the Vatican in Rome and have a wizard battle with the Pope. Assassin's Creed 2's ending isn't quite as bad and jarring as the first game, but it's not great either. Something of a staple in this era of Assassin's Creed is ending the game on a massive cliffhanger to build drama for the next game, which I guess is more acceptable when you're operating on a yearly release schedule, but it does make for some very strange finales. Hidden beneath the Vatican is a vault built by the ones who came before, and combining the Apple of Eden with the Papal Staff, which is also a piece of Eden, will open the door. But the door won't open for old Rodrigo, and despite being eager to kill him 5 minutes ago, Ezio decides this time it'll be a fist fight in which he spares Rodrigo because apparently in the last 5 minutes he's learned the folly of revenge. This just doesn't make any sense for the story that Assassin's Creed 2 has been telling. As mentioned, the game's revenge plot has no subversive edge to it. The men you're hunting are evil, plain and simple. They murdered a child. Rodrigo Borgia even does the most cliche villain thing ever early on when he kills one of his own henchmen for failing him. There is no redemption for Rodrigo here, as evidenced by the events of the next game, and so no reason Ezio, who spent the last 20 years killing people, would suddenly decide that now, at the head of the snake, is the time to give up the life, especially considering his eagerness to do the deed 5 minutes ago.
I thought I was beyond this. But I'm not. I've waited too long. Lost too much. Requiescat in pace, you bastard.
I don't think so. Get it over with, then.
No. Killing you won't bring my family back. I'm done.
At what point during the wizard battle did Ezio decide that killing Rodrigo wasn't worth it anymore? What changed in those 5 minutes? I have no idea. Rodrigo Borgia didn't die at this point in time, so Ezio can't kill him here, but there are many ways of making that happen without just having Ezio do a 180 on everything he believes for no good reason. The game wants this to be a big moment, but for me at least, it completely fails to land because it's just not a lesson that Ezio ever needed to learn in this game. Unlike the first game, Assassin's Creed 2 never questions the morality of the assassins. They're just the good guys and the Templars are the bad guys. There's no room for a murder is bad message in a game where you've just spent the last 15 hours murdering bad guys. Assassin's Creed 2 does have a good story, but its joy is in the journey and not the destination. It's the character moments, experiencing the historical events, watching as Ezio grows up over the years, flying over Venice in Da Vinci's flying machine, and all the other crazy set pieces the game dreams up for you. That's the hook of the story. Finally taking down Rodrigo Borgia is just the end of a checklist. Much like the first game, nothing about the finale feels all that final at all, and obviously because we've got 2 more games with Ezio on the horizon, so I think this final lesson is just a trick to make you think that Ezio has grown and changed and learned something by the end of his adventure, when really, it doesn't make any sense at all. Inside the vault is where the real crazy stuff happens though. The Roman goddess Minerva appears before Ezio, and she looks directly into the camera and talks to Desmond instead of Ezio. She reveals that she was one of the precursors and their society was wiped out by a massive apocalyptic solar flare, and that another one is about to happen and destroy modern human society as well. And then the credits roll.
It is done. The message is delivered. We are gone now from this world. All of us. We can do no more. The rest is up to you, Desmond.
What? Who is Desmond? I don't understand. Please, wait. I have so many questions.
What the fuck?
To its credit, it's a much better cliffhanger than the first game, and this time they do actually provide a little bit of an epilogue, at least for Desmond and the crew. Ezio's out of luck on that front. During the credits, Abstergo attacks the base, and Desmond has to use his newfound assassin skills to fight them off, thus demonstrating that all his training has paid off. As they drive off, Lucy reveals that the message from Minerva is why she chose Ezio, because now they know for sure they've got an apocalypse to prevent. We can talk more about the sun apocalypse when that plot gets resolved a few games down the road. That is the strange part of the early Assassin's Creed games compared to other franchises. There's an understanding that you're not playing a complete story, but chapters of an ongoing narrative in a way much more connected than your typical sequels. Much like this game, Brotherhood picks up immediately following the events of this one, and then same again for Revelations, and same again for Assassin's Creed 3, a chain that follows directly on from one to the next right down the line. When people talk about Assassin's Creed 2 having a really great story, you don't often hear them say, yeah, it had a really great finale, because ultimately the finale is inconsequential to what Assassin's Creed 2 really is. After all, does Animal Crossing really have a satisfying resolution? Or is the finale really whenever you decide you're done and put down the controller to be killed by the guards one last time? What makes Assassin's Creed 2 so iconic isn't any particular moment or thing, it's 100 different things that all come together to make a game that just clicks. At least it does for most people. It's a game that cemented what the identity of Assassin's Creed is, that strange mix of stealth, combat, exploration, and cozy life simulation that doesn't really seem like it should work, and yet somehow it just does. Is it one of the best games ever made? I don't really think so. I think it defangs itself too much to really claim that title. But it is absolutely the most important Assassin's Creed game for how it gave the series that universal appeal and recognition and cemented to everyone what Assassin's Creed is. It's the template that every future game either follows or subverts. Ezio might not be real, but I think he'll probably outlive all of us. And that can also be a curse. Sometimes, especially after a long enough time, success can be your own worst enemy. But we'll talk about that more later.
Silenzio! Silenzio! 22 years ago, I stood where I stand now and watched my loved ones die, betrayed by those I had called friends. Vengeance clouded my mind. It would have consumed me, were it not for the wisdom of a few strangers who taught me to look past my instincts. They never preached answers, but guided me to learn from myself. We don't need anyone to tell us what to do. Not Savonarola, not the Medici. We are free to follow our own path. There are those who will take that freedom from us. Too many of you gladly give it. But it is our ability to choose whatever you think is true that makes us human.
Thank you for watching, and a very special thank you to my wonderful patrons for your continued support. If you'd like to see your name up here, or just support the things that I do, then please consider signing up. It would mean a lot to me, as well as a like, a comment, a share, a subscribe, and hit the bell so that you'll always be notified when I upload a video like this. God, that feels so generic to say, doesn't it? To see my entire Assassin's Creed series critique, you can click this playlist up here to access the entire list. Or for something a bit different, I decided recently to watch every single filler episode of Naruto, and if I had to put myself through that, then the least you can do is watch the video I made about it.